Order, order. Okay. All right, so I'll start in the traditional way with a little bit of a brief overview of the agenda and then get into some more detailed remarks. And then at 3:20, the first of a series of speakers will come in, and that'll be about Ginger Clark from USC on teaching evaluations. So just to page up through here, Bettina. Today we don't have President Schiller or Provost Banavar talking. I think they might come to hear some of the presentations. But we got a pretty full agenda with stuff, as you can see. So the presentation on teaching evaluations, this will be the third time I've heard this, I got to say, but it's an excellent presentation, and I think will, for me, has served to reinforce the idea that the path that we are going down as a Senate is a good one and has a lot of potential for really substantial improvements. Then we're going to talk about the teaching evaluation warning language. So you may recall last year that the Senate proposed a disclaimer to be used in tenure evaluation, promotion, and merit decisions that points out some of the difficulties with student evaluations of teaching. And we're going to have we've gotten some feedback now from the General Counsel's office on a draft of this. I don't think, well, we'll see how that discussion goes. Okay. So there is a possible vote noted up there, but we would have to suspend the rules in order to do that vote. Then approval of the curriculum report. I think Francis is not here, but Mike Urbanczyk is in the back, and he is going to move that. And then I will discuss the policy for faculty membership on committees, task forces, and advisory groups, and I may get that through that discussion during these introductory remarks, which would give more time for Ginger Clark. Then at 4:20, we'll have a presentation from Libby Botlin and Hans Bernard. They work for UVO's State and Public Affairs Office. Essentially, they're the university's lobbyists in Salem, and they're going to talk about the upcoming legislative agenda and where UVO stands on some legislation that will have some impact on us. And then at 4:40, we'll have Rhonda Smith and Melanie Munzer from the Provost Office, and they will talk about a new approach to support for dual career employees, okay, which I think doesn't mean one employee with two jobs. It means two employees each with one job. Okay. First thing I want to talk about then is the CAS structure task force. So I think you've all got some information on that. There's been an email sent around campus announcing who will be on the committee. And as you know from my previous comments about that, I was not pleased with the way that worked out in terms of Senate input into the composition of the committee. But I think at this point, I personally am committed to doing everything I can to help the committee do a good job and come up with a report that lays out the costs and benefits of various potential restructuring or of keeping the structure that we have. I think that we need to, as a Senate, though, we need to weigh in on this matter. And because of the way things have been set up, it's not obvious how we will do that. There is a timeline posted on the Provost's website, but that called for them to meet on November 2nd, which I'm pretty sure they didn't do since they were just appointed. So, there will be some meetings, presumably, before the end of the term, but that would probably mean during finals week. These will be open meetings, so people can go. I think Karen Ford, the chair of the committee, is very committed to an open process and to, inviting participation. I know there's been one survey already of people's views on this, or their hopes and fears, I guess, coming from the faculty union, and presumably there'll be, more surveys coming out of the committee to ask people's ideas about how to proceed. So I do think there will be plenty of opportunity for public participation in whatever, in the work of that committee. But the provost and president have also said that the final decision will be made by them, which under law is their right, but under the delegation of authority, it's pretty clear that we as the faculty senate need to participate in that process in some way. So what I'm going to propose is that by the end of the year, I'm not sure when this committee's report will be out, but presumably it'll be out by April or May. And so by the end of the year, we will have that report. We do have 2 faculty on the committee, 2 senators, and I think that the proper thing then would be for the Senate to review that report, for the Senate Executive Committee to come up with a recommendation for the form of restructuring or against restructuring, however it works out, and then bring that to the Senate for a vote. I think that would probably be a resolution rather than legislation, but I could see it playing out either way. Legislation is obviously a stronger statement, and I think we should wait and see how we feel about it before we make that decision. Okay, so there are any questions about that process? Yes? Somebody?
I'm curious to know if the faculty survey that went out, if there's some questions that may be appropriate for the OAs and CAS to complete, or maybe even some of the classified staff. I've heard concerns from several people other than just faculty members, and I'm not sure if public forum is simply enough to get the support or to get feedback from non-faculty.
So the survey that has been sent out was sent out by the union, and I think it was only sent to faculty union members. But I'm assuming that the committee itself will send that survey out to the university-wide, maybe in different forms. That strikes me as good practice, and I just assume that they'll do that. But I will prompt them if it seems right. Any other questions about that? Okay. And then, so then I want to talk a little bit about this policy for faculty membership on committees, task forces, and advisory groups. So that's actually down on the agenda, but I kind of want to get it done with now. So Elizabeth and I met with the president and provost about this, and they are sympathetic to the idea of more Senate and faculty involvement in picking members of search and review committees. So these would in particular be search and review committees for deans and provost, vice provost, maybe, depending on the particular job description. And I think that, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think that includes the possibility of direct election by the units that are involved. So if this were a new, dean in School of Music and Dance, which I hope not because they just got one, that committee would, the members of that committee would, at least in some part, be selected through election of the faculty in that unit. Okay, they wouldn't necessarily be senators, but it's also possible that the senators from that unit would also, certainly they'd be eligible, and we might work out a situation where they would be sort of default members of a search committee for their unit. This principle seems very important to me in terms of making sure that the Senate is playing the role that it's supposed to play in shared governance in the future of the university. I think without being involved in important searches like that, we're kind of engaged in shared governance theater, not real shared governance. I don't know exactly how that will play out. The AAUP guidance I talked about last time was the idea that if it's that the faculty, the proportion of faculty on these committees should be higher if the committee deals with things that are more heavily academic matters. So I can imagine, for example, searches for, say, a general counsel where we might have 1 or 2 faculty on there, but searches for deans where we probably should be the majority of those in terms of faculty members. Now, in terms of members from the other Senate constituents, I think we haven't really had that conversation yet with the president and provost. We need to do that. So the process I'm envisioning here is that we'll continue those conversations. We'll talk this through more in the Senate Executive Committee, and we'll come back to you in January or February with a proposal that has some buy-in from the administration, so that it won't be just passing some legislation that we know is going to get vetoed. When it comes to advisory groups, such as the CAS Structure Task Force, and sometimes these are called committees, sometimes task forces, advisory groups, whatever, there I think it's going to be more difficult. I think that the president and the provost they see those as being groups that advise them, even if that advice is primarily about an academic matter. And I think there's a fundamental disagreement there between me, at least, and the president and the provost. And so I think we should carve off the hiring and review committees where there seems to be the potential for pretty easy agreement, and then worry about the advisory groups, which are less frequent. I mean, I don't think we're going to be restructuring colleges willy-nilly, although I retract that last aspirational statement. So let's see, other things. The institutional hiring plan, your departments should be preparing proposals for hiring to send to the deans and then up to the provost's office. I think they're due sometime in December. CS Dean Andrew Marcus and Bruce Blonigan, the incoming interim dean, met with the CAS caucus, which is the group of all senators from CAS, faculty senators from CAS, and they proposed that the CAS caucus review and approve the list of hires that they were proposing to the next level up, to the provost's office. And so I think that's a great step in giving the Senate some say over what will happen in the institutional hiring plan. And I would encourage people who are not from CAS to talk with us about organizing a caucus of your own for your own college. Some of you are from colleges where there's only 2-3 senators, so that would be a pretty small caucus, but you could easily expand it by having non-senators elected by the people in your college to expand the group, and then you would have a real, democratically elected advisory group for the dean. And I really do think, that would be a substantial improvement in shared governance. I think that would be helpful for the deans to have that kind of input and that kind of buy-in in their decision making. So please, if you're not from CAS and you're interested in that, come talk to us about that, and we'll give you some support to get it going. The Board of Trustees is going to meet this Monday and Tuesday at the Ford Alumni Center. And basically, Monday is committee meetings. Tuesday is a meeting of the entire board. You can go to trustees.uoregon.edu and find, with a little bit of searching, you can find the agendas for those meetings. I would strongly encourage people from the Senate to look through that and to attend some of the committee meetings and perhaps the board meeting as well. One of the things that will be discussed is the university budget, and so if you're curious about the budget and the budgeting priorities, I think that's an opportunity for you to see what kind of information the trustees are getting and how they discuss that information. And so if we're going to try to argue, as I think we should, that we would also like to be part of those budgeting discussions, we need to make sure that we're at least as well informed as the trustees are. And so I think going to the appropriate committee meeting is a good way to get started on that. The committee meetings also deal with things like the risk management plan, the auditor report, that sort of thing, which are also generally very interesting. Additionally, the board needs a new student trustee. This is a 2-year appointment, and the current student trustee is stepping down. I don't think they're eligible for reappointment. So the board is searching for a new student trustee. So if you have a student, I don't think it has to be an undergraduate, but I might be wrong. If you have a student that you think would be good for this and would be interested, I encourage you to talk with them and potentially nominate them or get them to self-nominate as a member. Okay. So then I want to say just a quick bit before we get on to the teaching evaluations talk about what's coming up next term. So it's going to be a busy term. This is pretty typical. The Senate starts off with a little bit slowly with not a lot of votes because we got to get the discussion and stuff done. But very soon in the winter term, the conflict of interest and commitment policy will come to us for vote. And that's already been discussed, so I'm hoping that we can move pretty quickly to do that, perhaps at the January 16th meeting, under the argument that the substantial discussion has already occurred and the amendments are, or the changes that have been made since then are fairly minor. Another policy that will be coming to us in winter is the sexual and romantic relationships policy. The Committee on Gender and Sexual-Based Violence has been working very hard on that policy. It's a complicated policy, as you've seen from the presentations of it. I'm not sure that committee is going to be able to reach consensus on a policy. I think there are a couple sticking points there, and so I think that policy will come to the Senate, with options, and we will be asked to decide between some fairly significant differences in the policy. So I want to make sure that everybody is as well informed about that as possible. And so I expect that we'll devote a significant amount of time at our January 16th meeting to discussing that and then voting on it at the January 30th meeting. Another policy that will come to us pretty soon is the emergency grading policy. Francis talked about that last time. And then we expect to also have some I don't want to call them policies, but some things from the Knight campus regarding new programs, academic programs, and governance. And I don't think that's quite as time sensitive as the other policies, so that'll probably come later in winter. And then, of course, Elizabeth is going to be working on the committee restructuring plan, and that will presumably come to us sometime maybe spring. Chris is working on the core ed. Is there going to be Senate business coming out of your committee, and when? Okay. You want to tell us any more, or just? Okay. But something will be coming. Yep. Okay. And then the last thing I want to put on people's radar is the question of student success. So as you know, the university is engaged in a big effort to improve four-year graduation, student retention rates. My understanding is that the university is doing okay. We have this push to increase student enrollment. We're actually doing okay on enrollment for freshmen, but the retention rates are not as high as we would like. And so I think the university has very competent people working on that question, but as a Senate, we're a little bit isolated from what's going on, and so I'm going to make sure that we spend some time getting up to speed on those issues, because I think, and the President's office and Elizabeth agree, that this is really should be core Senate business, that we should be helping to solve these problems. Okay. So that's all I have for right now. I'd like to invite Ginger Clark to come up. So Ginger is a professor at USC, and she was chair of their faculty senate a couple years ago, and she is now in charge of basically USC's effort to reform its teacher evaluation system. And so she's going to give us a presentation on that, and there'll be time for Q&A afterwards. Right. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. A few different things have happened at USC that sort of led us to this place. One of which was there were three different faculty committees that made recommendations that we make a pretty significant overhaul to teaching at USC. One was a task force from the Academic Senate in 2014 that recommended changes to the way faculty are evaluated overall, and teaching was a big chunk of the white paper that came out of that task force. From there, the current provost, had just come into office, and he took that report and then convened a faculty task force to to look at that a little bit more closely, the teaching aspect of evaluation. And then that task force made recommendations. And finally, the Academic Senate and the Provost then asked the Joint Senate Provost Committee on Teaching and Academic Programs to come up with a set of recommendations for how to implement the recommendations that came out of those reports. And so one of the other things that happened, aside from sort of these initiatives coming out of the Academic Senate, was that we had a new provost and new vice provost who came in who were eminent researchers in their field, but also really cared a lot about teaching and wanted to elevate the status of teaching at USC, and felt like we hadn't done due diligence to ensure that we were helping faculty develop teaching skills, evaluating it in a rigorous way, but also, very importantly, rewarding teaching at all levels. So not just teaching performance, but rewarding faculty for investing in their teaching, rewarding faculty for investing in significant review of one another's teaching. And so those sort of those storms came together to form the perfect storm, and also in the process of us sort of building this new plan. I'm sure most of you saw the articles that came out in the Chronicle of Education and Inside Higher Ed about the problems associated with student evaluations for evaluating teaching, and we can talk a little bit about that. So what we did is we came up with a model for teaching that isn't especially innovative, but it is the model that we use to promote research at USC. And the model is to develop, evaluate, and reward teaching. And if you think about this as sort of a cone that you're looking at from the top, the foundation of the model really is the university. And the infrastructure that the university creates to support teaching, including a university-wide definition of excellence in teaching. The second layer is the schools, and this is really where most of the action is going to happen at USC, because we're such a decentralized university. The schools really have to figure out for themselves how they define teaching in their discipline, certainly aligned with the university's definition, but it has to be customized to the school, how they're going to promote teaching, development of teaching, how they're going to evaluate it and reward it. And then, of course, faculty have to do a lot of reflection themselves in terms of looking at how they want to invest in their teaching, how they want to invest in evaluation, and how it should be rewarded. The Center for Excellence in Teaching, so I play a couple of different roles at USC. Initially, I was faculty over in the School of Education. I was a counseling psychologist. I ran the marriage and family therapy program there, and got involved in faculty governance. I was a part of the Senate subcommittee for what we called at the time non-tenure track faculty affairs. We now call them our research, teaching, practitioner, and clinical faculty, RTPC. And from there, got involved with the executive board of the Senate, and then eventually was elected president of the Senate. And we passed a number of resolutions around folks who didn't necessarily have a voice at the university, initiatives around diversity and inclusion, our RTPC faculty, our part-time faculty, things around teaching, as well as reproducibility in research and so forth. And so what ended up happening was the provost's office said, that's great, we want to implement these resolutions, now you have to come over here and help us figure out how to implement them. And so part of what I was asked to do is work in the vice provost's office for faculty and academic and faculty affairs. But my other role is as the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching. So in my role in the vice provost's office, I was working to develop this plan and initiative around teaching, and in my role as director of Center for Excellence in Teaching, we developed the resources to try to support that initiative so that it was not an unfunded mandate with no resources. So what the university did to invest in teaching is we spent 2 years pulling together this plan. We came up with a definition of excellence in teaching that was first begun among our education faculty on campus, and then was vetted through a number of different faculty from various disciplines across both of our campuses. We reorganized our Center for Excellence in Teaching to be more of a service provision center where we're training faculty. We have a train the trainer model where we train faculty to go back into the schools and train their colleagues in teaching. We've developed evaluation tools for schools to use or not use or adapt. And then we're also trying to provide evidence-based resources to schools, because as we roll out this new initiative, the schools are really going to need to develop a plan that defines excellence in teaching, talks about how they're going to develop it, how are they going to evaluate it, and how are they going to reward it. That's a lot of work to go and figure out what best practices in teaching are in the discipline. And so we really did as much groundwork as we could for the schools to develop resources that already had that information in it, and the schools could go and utilize those resources or adapt them if they wished. The other thing that and of course we continue to do consultation with departments and individual faculty to help with teaching as well, and course design, program design. But the other thing that the university did that was pretty dramatically different from the way that we did things before is, in order to sort of acknowledge the importance of teaching that went on at the university, the provost decided to create what we're calling a continuing appointment for our teaching track faculty. So what that means is faculty who reach full professorship on the teaching track, who demonstrate excellence and leadership in teaching, can be put up by their school for a continuing appointment and be reviewed by our tenure and promotions committee at the university level for that continuing appointment. If they're awarded that, they're no longer on a 1, 3, or 5 year contract. They now can expect to be continually reappointed every year, indefinitely, barring any kind of catastrophic change in their department. But even then, the guidelines say that the dean needs to try to find another position for that faculty member. So it's not tenure, but it is more of a security of employment for our teaching track faculty to demonstrate the university's value of what they provide to the university. I'm not going to go through this, but this is our definition. I believe you all have it in front of you. The definition is something that we consider a living document. As the schools start to develop their own definitions, we expect we'll probably make some changes to the university one, because the schools are going to have great ideas that we hadn't thought about. And what we're asking the schools to do is to come up with their own definition that's discipline specific, based in best practices in their area, but that is generally aligned to the major buckets that are covered by the university's definition. This definition was, as I said, developed by faculty, vetted through faculty. It went through the Faculty Senate Executive Board. And the place where we are now is, once the university has now sort of developed all of these resources in this frame, essentially, we've turned it over to the schools and asked them to develop and submit a teaching excellence plan. The first part of that plan requires the schools, when they submit it to the provost's office for review, to tell us who were the faculty that were on the task force that developed this plan, what was the process that you used to get feedback from your faculty on this plan, and what was the process you used to get a vote of assent on this plan. And the reason we put that in is that it was really critical that this not be developed by somebody in the dean's office. It was crucial that this had to come from the entire faculty of each individual school if this was going to take hold and really mean something to all of the faculty in the school. So that faculty governance piece was critical. So every school had to define teaching excellence, had to tell us how they were going to develop it. They can use, so the Center for Excellence in Teaching, for instance, has created training institutes for faculty at various levels in their career. We have institutes for future faculty, graduate students who are going to go into academia. We have institutes for new faculty, and we have a Faculty Fellows Institute where we train sort of faculty leaders, senior level faculty who are great instructional leaders in the school, who will then go back into the schools and train their own sort of mid to late career colleagues, so that we're having much more impact. We're reaching many, many more faculty in terms of training and development than we would ever be able to reach on our own. So schools can utilize our institutes if they like, or they can create their own training opportunities. They can send faculty to teaching conferences, do mentoring, formative evaluation, and so forth. But they have to tell us what they are doing, and they have to tell us how it's aligned to their definition of excellence in teaching. The other big shift that's happening at USC is we are moving away from student evaluations towards a peer review system. And the reason for that is what we used to do to evaluate teaching is we would use student evaluations, and we would use what we call item 11, overall, how would you rate this course, and item 12, how would you rate your instructor, and that was it. That's all we used to evaluate teaching. And what we know is that those items don't really tell us anything specific about teaching. They don't tell us how to improve. They don't tell us what somebody can do differently or what somebody's doing well. And they're the most prone to bias because it's a subjective sense that students have about their course or their instructor. It's not tied to any kind of criteria, any behavior, any characteristic of the course. It's just, what'd you think? So we're moving away from that, and we're moving away from using student evaluations as our primary measure for lots of reasons. There's a number of articles that talk about how student evaluations are not correlated to other measures of teaching effectiveness or learning outcomes, that there's a significant gender bias or a threat of gender bias. We know that this doesn't show up in every school, but we know that there is definitely a systematic sort of effect of women being rated lower than men. And this is interestingly true. There was a study that was done where male and female faculty taught one course online as a male faculty member and as a female faculty member. And in both cases, the male faculty member was rated higher than the female faculty member. We also found the effect, or a study also found the effect when students were randomly assigned to male and female faculty. There's some evidence. This is on a study that looked at Rate My Professor. It's an initial study. There's some evidence for faculty of color, but we think that the numbers of faculty of color are, the lower numbers make it more difficult to do more systematic studies of this, but we suspect that we would find the same effect there. So what our provost, and this sort of came out in the middle of us developing this plan. These studies were highlighted in the Chronicle. And so as a result, we sort of changed gears midway. While we were going to decrease the impact of student evaluations, our provost came out and said, we can't use this as a primary measure to evaluate teaching anymore. We cannot continue to disadvantage a significant portion of our faculty population. So we made some changes. We spent a lot of time changing our student evaluation to provide our faculty subscales so that they had a better sense of what the questions were actually asking. And this was actually requested by our faculty through those reports I mentioned earlier, that they have subscales to kind of better understand the ratings. We also added student engagement items so that students, as they were as they were providing this evaluation, they would have in their mind, I'm not just a passive receptacle that my faculty pours knowledge into, that I actually contribute to the learning environment in my class, and I need to be thinking about what my responsibility for what my learning experience was. But these questions also provide both faculty and departments information on how students study, whether they access their faculty, do changes need to be made in terms of how much or how little we're asking students to do. We took items 11 and 12 out. We took out the global items. The qualitative feedback was specific. So we asked students, if you disagreed with any of the items under these subscales, tell us one thing the faculty member could do to improve that portion of the course. So we asked for more specific feedback to try to cut back on bias. We fully expect the new instrument will also be biased, by the way. We didn't try to sort of pull that out because there's no way to pull out the bias for students. But we did try to kind of cut down on it by making it a very specific evaluation tool. We also asked what students found the most and least valuable about the course. And finally, we gave guidance in the directions about how to give feedback. So what we told students was, your comments should be focused on course design or instruction. That comments about personal characteristics about the faculty member are not appropriate and won't be considered. And so we were trying to help them understand how to give professional feedback in their feedback. So because of the bias issue and because, you know, students are not trained to be experts in pedagogy or instruction, and yet we're treating them as our experts to evaluate teaching, what we tried to do is think about how to use the student voice in the way that mattered, how to use this instrument for what it actually measured, which was the student experience. And students are experts in that, in telling us what their experience was in the class. And that's really important. It helps faculty to adjust the way that they're engaging their students. So let's see. So what we're asking our faculty to do is ensure that they're looking at their student evaluations to inform their teaching. Initially, the provost said student evaluations can be used as an indirect measure in that we will ask faculty to do a teaching reflection statement every year, and in that reflection statement we will ask the question, how did you use the data from your student evaluations and other sources of data to adjust the way you teach your class every year? And that faculty could then use the feedback in a really meaningful way, and students would have the voice, right? But faculty wouldn't be affected by the threat of the bias issue. There was a lot of pushback from, particularly from vice deans and from some faculty who were concerned about students not having a direct voice in evaluating teaching. And so what the provost did is came up with a solution where teaching would be evaluated using multiple categories. Teaching effectiveness should be the largest category. I'm going to go to that slide really quickly. Teaching effectiveness should be the largest category, and most of teaching effectiveness should be measured using a peer review process. Student evaluations can't be used to evaluate teaching effectiveness because they don't. But schools could include other categories and should include other categories to evaluate teaching. For instance, we should evaluate and reward faculty for investing in their teaching. So we should be asking faculty, what did you do to develop your teaching this year? Did you go to an institute? Did you go to a conference? Did you go to a workshop? And you should get merit for investing in your teaching. We would look at whether faculty are investing in review of their peers' teaching. And we should be evaluating that and rewarding that so that faculty feel like it's an important part of their jobs. Inclusive practices could be another category. And student engagement is the category where the provost said, okay, you can use student engagement as one category to evaluate teaching, and student evaluations can fit in there because that really is what they're measuring. But they can't be the only measure you use there. You would need to have other measures to try to offset any threat of bias from the student evaluations. So those are some of the changes that we made around the student evaluations. The peer review piece primarily lies in the teaching effectiveness, and you can send out these slides so you can look at them more closely. I won't spend too much time on this, but I kind of created a table to talk about how each of these things could be measured. Peer review for us isn't just peer observation, classroom observation. It's syllabus or course materials review, it's assessment or grading review, it's teaching reflection statement review, as well as classroom observation. Okay, so the schools, again, need to define excellence in teaching, tell us how they're going to develop it, how are they going to evaluate it, and then one of the things that we're really trying to encourage the schools to do is as soon as they know what they're going to use to evaluate teaching using peer review, they should send those measures out to faculty right away. so that faculty have a chance to do some critical self-reflection based on those measures. They should train faculty on how to use those measures and give them an opportunity to do some formative evaluation on each other to get a sense of what that's like, get some feedback from one another, just acclimate to the measure, and then come to a faculty meeting and share that experience to try to help, offset some of the anxiety about it, some of the concerns about it, maybe adjust the process a little bit based on those kind of formative evaluation trials. So those are the recommendations we're making to our school. Again, independent critical self-reflection with the new peer review instruments, formative peer review first, and then we would shift into using them for summative evaluation. The other thing we really tried to do is to get the schools to think about how whatever they do for merit review, annual merit review, really should very directly align to what is needed for promotion. Because one of the things that we hear from faculty is they feel like they have to do something different to get a promotion than what they've been doing for merit. And so we wanted faculty to be able to, for instance, if a school decided year one we're going to do materials review or syllabus review, and year two we're going to do assessment review, year three we'll do classroom observation, and then year four we'll cycle back and do syllabus review. Well, by the time somebody goes up for tenure or promotion, they'll have gone through those three measures twice each. And maybe they can choose, the report they feel most comfortable with and submit that in their dossier for promotion or for tenure. Or if they don't like the results of the two that they've done of each, they can ask for a third. But the good news is they've gone through all three of those twice. So their teaching will have improved significantly from the time that they started. And our hope is that just as you all submit papers to journals, and sometimes they're accepted and sometimes they're rejected, but you always get feedback. And whether it's rejected or accepted, that feedback makes you a better writer. It makes you a better researcher, a better scholar. We don't do that with teaching. We just assign these numbers that don't really mean much, and we don't give really substantial feedback. And so we wanted this peer review process to be evaluative, but to be developmental also. And so the hope is that, whatever I'm doing, if I'm doing well in my merit review every year, I should expect that at promotion time I'm in a good position to be promoted, because what I'm doing in my merit review is what I need to do for my promotion. So finally, what the schools need to provide in their plans is clear criteria for teaching, and not just, again, teaching performance, right? But criteria for investing in your teaching needs to be rewarded, investing in peer review needs to be rewarded, and investing in performance. In merit, in tenure, promotion, continuing appointment. We also are asking schools to be sure that they had awards, teaching awards. A lot of schools did not. Or, thinking about how they can support grants and leaves to support teaching would also be an important piece of their plan. And then as I mentioned before, what CET has tried to do is create a lot of those resources for the schools. Everything we created was downloadable and editable. So the schools could customize it with their own criteria, their own language, but they wouldn't have to start from scratch in figuring out best practices. They don't have to use our stuff. They can, if their professional organization has, already a definition of excellence, or they've already got great peer review tools, they can absolutely use those. We just didn't want to say, create this plan, but go become experts in teaching and learning while you're doing the rest of your job. So we really wanted to try to create something that was that would give everybody a running start. So one of the things that I've been telling people, lessons learned from this, is memos. Nobody reads memos. So we really have to find a better way to communicate with our campus. One of the things I would do differently as we talked about these teaching initiatives would be to hold town hall meetings in various schools multiple times to try to reach people who aren't involved in faculty governance. Because I relied really heavily on the Senate, because I was very familiar with the Senate, and that was the governance structure I was used to. But there are a lot of faculty who aren't involved in the Senate who didn't didn't know what was happening. And so I would have been more engaged with the community. Probably would have started with a more incremental bottom-up approach. I think I would have still created all of the resources and done that piece, but I would have released those resources when it was useful for the schools. So starting with asking the schools to define excellence in teaching would have organically created questions like, well, okay, we've got this criteria, but how are we going to get faculty to these criteria? How are we going to evaluate them? That would have been a natural conversation that would have come from creating that definition. So I wish we would have, kind of taken that tack as opposed to sort of revealing everything at once, which overwhelmed a lot of folks at our school. And then, providing citations and support, because faculty want to see the research that shows that this is going to be better than what we're doing. And so while we utilized evidence-based practices, we hadn't created a database to provide to the faculty, so we're creating that now. But so I would just recommend that. So that's everything I have. I know you wanted time for questions.
Thanks very much, Ginger. And I'd like to invite Sierra to come up also in case there are questions about what we are doing, because it's sort of remarkable that USC and U of O are now kind of on a convergent path. Yeah. I don't think we knew too much about what you were doing and vice versa, and yet I won't reiterate everything that we are doing through the Senate, but it's very similar to what has gone on at USC. I'll also note that there are a couple members in the back, or a couple visitors in the back from University of Washington, which is getting started on a similar revision of its teaching evaluation. And so this is, you've been here since 9 o'clock this morning. You gave a public talk. You spent 2 hours with the committee and an hour with Scott Pratt. So, thank you for doing all that. And now you just have to answer a few questions. So I think Chris was first. If you could wait for a mic, please, make sure that Chris gets a mic.
Thank you, and it's really impressive how much you all are investing in teaching. Is it on? Oh, you can hear it? I did have some questions about it. Like, for example, is this evidence-based? Like, if you do all these things that are listed here, will students learn more? If you go through all of the processes to develop your teaching better, will you be a better teacher? How are those things measured? Because one thing that strikes me, and I'm in education as well, is that there is no simple strategy for being a good teacher. Yeah. And if I had to say what makes a good teacher, it would be the more that you invest in knowing about the content of what you're teaching, the better you would be at it. And a lot of these processes cost that. They take away from faculty members' ability to actually invest in learning more about their subject matter.
So one of the things that we really struggled with was the literature in higher ed around teaching is really mushy because faculty have academic freedom. It's hard to get systematic studies, random assignment, replication of studies. So that was sort of an eye opener for me in terms of finding that out. And where we landed on this was it's hard to isolate the impact of one faculty member on a learning outcome of a student or an outcome of a student, because you may have an interaction effect of a student taking 2 faculty at the same time or 2 courses at the same time. So it's really hard to figure out, because a student did better on some outcome, was it because of me or was it because of some other extraneous variable? Where we landed was trying to use best practices. And so things like active learning, one of the things that makes knowledge stickier for students is engaging with the knowledge, right? As opposed to just sort of passively receiving the knowledge from somebody lecturing. It's actually, learning those basic ideas from somebody else and then practicing it yourself, trying to teach it to someone else, right? And so we really tried to focus on the presence or absence of best teaching practices, and that's where we focused our efforts around the evaluation piece.
Anthony Hornoff, Computer and Information Science. I have the same question. Where is first of all, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for what you're doing at USC, and thank you to the people working on this here. It's a really difficult problem. But where is, at the core, the question, the evaluation of whether students are thoroughly learning a lot of really useful stuff that will help them, that will help society, and that will help the planet for the lives of those students. Now, at the very least, I would like an acknowledgement that that is really what we want to know, and we can't know it.
I acknowledge that.
All in favor?
No, it's.
But I want it in the materials. I mean, everything listed here, it sounds good. You know, inclusiveness, yeah, that sounds good. Professionalism, it sounds good. But these are all indirect guesses at what will really contribute to what we really care about.
We've struggled with this question. I mean, these are conversations we've had at our university as well. And what's hard is defining teaching, which is why we're asking the schools to define it. But really, if we were really serious about this, we would ask every program to define. So it wouldn't just be the schools, or it wouldn't just be departments. It would be every program, because excellence in teaching depends on what we're teaching and for what purpose, right? And so it's a very thorny, complicated process. And so where we really tried to focus our energy was based on things that we know will engage students, that will model for them practices in our disciplines that, are considered best practices in those disciplines. You're right. I mean, through this process, I really struggled with there not being very clear answers to this. So I guess that's the best answer I have for you on this.
We're clearly in the world of second best. I think. Do you have a question?
Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation. My question is about numbers, because this sounds great to me when I have 20 students in a class, but sometimes I teach classes with 360 students in an auditorium, and I don't understand how this can work as an evaluation for both circumstances, even if the same department agrees on what we're supposed to be teaching. So I'm wondering how numbers would affect this.
Well, I can just tell you. So one of the things that our center does is we'll go and consult with faculty about how to incorporate active learning in large classrooms, what types of activities you can do.
Okay, Madonna.
Thank you very much. Is it? Okay. I was wondering if this is a much more operational and less philosophical question, but I was wondering if you've had a chance to review the piloted teaching evaluation system that our committee has come up with, and what your thoughts are on that.
The student evaluation? Yeah, so the one we're doing right now, a pilot. I don't know if you. I haven't had a chance to look at that.
Yeah.
We're mostly focused on what she's sharing with us.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it would be very interesting to get your feedback, because it's very much, as I have read it, it seems like it's trying to get the students to comment on what they're qualified to comment on, which is their experience in the classroom, as opposed to the teacher's performance in the classroom. And so it's very much in line with what you've described, and I'd be interested in your feedback.
It's been really lovely, actually, to see how much our work has converged, that we've sort of landed in the same place without working together or knowing that each other was working on this. And in many respects, it helps validate that, maybe we're on the right track. I mean, some of this is sort of a common sense approach to this. So it's been lovely to see how much we agree.
And that would be my view, too. When I looked at the two surveys, I was just sort of struck by how much overlap there was. Maria? So Jim's got the mic, and then Maria.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I had the good fortune of having a very good teacher for my graduate and undergraduate education, and actually a very distinguished individual. And 20 years later, I said, oh, that's what Colin was trying to say. Or now I get it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's this delay, you know. I mean, when you're doing evaluations for teaching, usually in the past, we've done evaluations in our unit when students have final projects due. So the anxiety level is up here, and they don't like anything, right? You know, I mean, they're so stressed out.
You, right?
Yeah.
Like they're mad at you for making them work so hard.
But then there are other measures. So graduates of a particular individual over school, maybe they've published, maybe they've gone on to distinguished careers. There are other measurements that can be brought to bear that are more long-term. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's unreasonable for us to expect that all students are going to get it, you know, during the the 10 weeks that they're with this particular individual. I think it's a much more complex evolution and learning process that happens over time.
I agree. In my personal opinion, I don't know that I could ever get the university to do this, but my personal opinion is student evaluations at the end of the term could be useful for just letting us know were the basics there. Was the faculty, prepared? Were they, is everything okay, right? But the more meaningful, sort of impactful questions, I agree, could be asked later, even in an alumni survey. What faculty actually had the most impact on your career, on your ability to succeed in graduate school? Or, I do think those questions, those delayed experience questions, can be really powerful.
Pass that down to Maria. I think Maria's next. We have time for one or two after that.
Hi, I'm obviously a student in finals week. It's week 10, I think. I don't know. Okay. Well, anywho, I was going to ask how much student input you had to develop, because obviously you want to encapsulate what teachers want to improve on, but I'm curious if you asked how much of your students did you get kind of information on what would be what are things they want to talk about, because I think the inclusion practices are really interesting. I also think the wording of it, because it's kind of what do you mean by how do they handle diverse perspectives or students with diverse backgrounds? Are you asking were these professors adequate in not being racist or not being sexist? I mean for real. I mean, that's an issue that I know that in classes we've talked about oh, well, I don't think that professor actually handled this particular student microaggressing all these other students before, and then talking to the professor about that. But then it's is that relevant for everyone, or is that just relevant for probably the students being microaggressed?
So we used kind of a cognitive interview process for students to make sure that what we were asking is what they understood to be what we were asking. But I think what you're describing was a sort of weakness, because we were trying to keep the number of items small, and we were trying to make them not wordy. But I think what can sometimes happen is you lose your meaning sometimes. And so we use that process to make sure that the students were understanding what we were asking. But I don't think any of us was completely satisfied that we got at everything we wanted to get at with the survey.
Right, because even with for diversity, we could talk about was your instructor good at providing accessibility needs, right? There's tons of stories that come out oh, my professor made me disclose what my accommodations was because they didn't understand it, and that's really unethical, but kind of happens a lot just because we're not trained on how to talk about that. So I'm just curious for some of those things how how you could go about that, and whether or not everyone was included on it, because diverse here is said 5 times. Mm-hmm. But what do you really mean? Just kind of stuff like that.
Maybe one more question.
Again, thank you so much for coming in and presenting this to us. It's really great work. I'd be very interested though to hear you just briefly characterize how the rollout of this has gone, in particular what the challenges have been, what the pushbacks have been. Clearly this is a huge institutional change which affects a lot of things, especially workload, I would imagine, as well as kind of changing the way that students have input around to have agency over the nature of their own teaching and their own experience. So I just wonder if you could say a little bit about how the rollout has gone, and particularly what the major challenges you faced in effecting this very big change.
So, there have been a number of faculty who have said, it's about time. We've been asking for this for a long time. There are also a number of faculty who felt that the previous system worked fine, and that this was going to be unworkable in terms of the amount of time it was going to take. And so the way that we've tried to address that is in turning it over to the schools and asking the faculty to define, to come up with processes, to come up with evaluation measures that they feel will work in their school. And it's going to look different in each of our schools. So, for instance, in our college, it's a huge academic unit, and so it's not going to make sense for them to use classroom observation for all of their faculty every year, or even every other year. And so every school may come up with a different system. So in our college right now, they do merit review every 3 years, and then they sort of average that over 3 years in order to just manage that load. So we did leave it in the hands of the faculty to come up with a workable system, and tried to sort of, part of this was top down, but we tried to make the bulk of it bottom up so that it was a workable system. The students, actually, I did expect them to be more concerned about not having a direct voice, but I consulted with the president of the graduate student government and the undergraduate student government, some of our student-led, the newspaper on our campus, and the basic feedback I got was, thank God you're doing this, and because they didn't feel like there was enough oversight over teaching. They didn't feel like there was enough investment in teaching at the university. They all said they've had wonderful professors, but one or two maybe didn't meet the mark. And so there was that piece of it. And then and again, I was surprised by this, but they said, I'm not an expert in teaching. I don't know why I'm evaluating. I can tell you what my experience was in the classroom, and I can tell you whether or not, the teacher met my learning experience needs. But to ask me to evaluate actually how they taught, they didn't really, they didn't think it was appropriate. So, and again, I've only, that's not all the students, right? So I don't know if other students might have a different perspective, but that was the feedback we got from students. So the rollout, it's a huge culture shift. I'll be honest with you, it put our faculty in crisis for a little bit, because this is a core part of our identity. And, we're sort of shifting how we define that core part of our identity. Number one. Number two, almost all of us were put into the classroom with no development, no training, and now we're being held accountable for something that our organization or our mentors didn't give us, right? So I think there's a lot of sort of identity struggle around this, and we're trying to make accommodations for that and give faculty power over this. So that's sort of how we're trying to handle that.
Okay, thank you very much again. Okay, so we have a couple more pieces of business, and first I want to talk about the disclaimer for bias in student course evaluations, which is a part of what the Senate committed to doing last year with the motion that we passed on this, and is part of the process that we're undergoing now. And so, Bettina, if you can bring up the slide with the, it's just at the bottom of the agenda. So the committee, the Teaching Evaluations Committee, prepared this a week or two ago, and we sent it off to the General Counsel's office just for review. And we've gotten some feedback on it, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that feedback and then ask for some suggestions as to how we should proceed next. So the original intent was that this disclaimer would be ready this term, and that it would be inserted into promotion and tenure and merit review packets. So just I'm going to read the language out loud because I think it's kind of important. Research has shown that student evaluations, particularly numerical ratings, are marred by bias against women, racial and ethnic minorities, and other groups, and are generally unrelated to teaching effectiveness. So just as an aside, let's make sure we keep the difference between teaching effectiveness and student satisfaction or student engagement clear. I think that was one of the most interesting things that came out of USC's report that we just heard. I mean, I think many of us intuitively understand that, but it's important to keep it clear. Despite these problems, numerical ratings using our current instrument may still be collected. So the Senate is saying until we get a better system, we can use what we've got. And past numerical ratings may still be used in teaching evaluation. I'm almost thinking that that should say something like in measuring student engagement, since that is what they are good at doing. The U.S. Senate, in cooperation with the Office of the Provost, is revising U.S. teaching evaluation instruments and practices in response to this research. During this transition, numerical student evaluations of teaching should not be used, it says should, not shall, should not be used as a standalone measure of teaching quality for any university purpose. Instead, teaching should be evaluated primarily using instructor self-reflection, peer reviews, and substantive written student comments, in alignment with the academic unit definition of teaching excellence as that is developed. So some units have definitions of teaching excellence, others don't. And so this is in part a prompt to make sure that people get to work on that, and that will be well supported by the Committee on Teaching Evaluations, just as it was at USC. They're working on that right now. So that's the language that I was prepared to bring to the Senate today, possibly for a vote, but at least for discussion. We then got some feedback back from the General Counsel's office, and I'm not going to read that verbatim, but I think that there are a couple main issues in it. One is that they're concerned that this Senate action might override parts of the faculty union CBA or individual unit policies that have been adopted as in accordance with that CBA, and they point out that that would be problematic. I've talked with the union's executive committee, which was easy because I'm on it, and the union, I think, is very committed to this process, and Chris is president of the union now, and so we would be willing, to write an MOU with the administration that would allow this disclaimer to be included. So I don't think that that's an obstacle which I think we can overcome pretty easily. They go on to say, the General Counsel's report goes on to say that they're concerned about the opening sentence, which essentially states that our current practice with respect to teaching evaluations has a discriminatory impact. And I am not really sure how to take that. I think that used without this disclaimer and used as standalone measures of teaching effectiveness, yes, they have a discriminatory impact, and they don't provide useful information to measure teaching effectiveness. But if they're properly used with other measures, as this disclaimer calls for, I think we're making every reasonable effort to mitigate that bias. The alternative would be just say, we can't solve this problem, no more student evaluations will be collected, and I suppose that the existing ones will be, burned or something, not used in tenure and promotion, which seems a little draconian to me, and more than a little unfair to people who have, invested a lot in maintaining their high teaching evaluations. So I want to go forward with this disclaimer language. I want to get it done this quarter, But this is our last Senate meeting until January 16th. Promotion and tenure files are going out now to the committees. And so I think it's important that we do this in a timely way. So I'm looking for suggestions on how to, negotiate with the General Counsel's office and get something out there, given the urgency of this. I think Chris Sinclair had his hand up, and then.
I mean, could we just kick it back to the committee and ask them to do those negotiations? Like, if any of the language actually needs to be changed, why don't we have the committee who came up with the language work with the GC's office in order to make that happen?
So for some reason, the Senate was suspicious of its Senate president last year, and
good reasons.
They insisted that the Senate would vote on the language. So this would be, would require us to amend that motion, or I don't think we need to amend the motion. We just say that this, despite the previous motion, we authorize the committee to negotiate.
Or we could vote on this language right here and then give you permission to change it.
That would also be possible. Yeah, Chris Murray.
The more I've just started reading more and more about this from these discussions, and the more compelling argument to me is that it appears to me that they're unrelated to student learning, that ratings don't necessarily correlate with student learning in a class. That's a serious problem. And in addition, that they really are a consumer satisfaction. That's what they rate. Mm-hmm. So, to me, the just based on the last conversation, I don't know as much about the gender and racial bias, but on the last conversation, it seemed like the evidence for racial bias was less convincing than these meta-analyses, these different meta-analysis we've had related to student learning. So maybe those two should be more prominent as a justification for not including evaluations in promotion.
Okay, so we're getting now into the wording of this, which is not something I want to do on the Senate floor. I would rather, even delay until January. I think our choices really here are to kick it back to the committee, as Chris says, and have the committee take into account suggestions along those lines. But we either do that or we wait till January to have have another draft of it and so forth. So I don't want to discourage you or others from making those points about this particular wording, but we do need to decide today what we're going to do about it. We do have a little bit more time. I just got a note saying that one of the later agenda items can be shortened, so I don't feel like there's time pressure. We can talk about this for another 10 minutes. Yes.
So I gather. Okay, I gather you don't want to talk about the wording, but when I read it, I thought the line about "despite this, these things may still be used" was as in a warning, a cautionary. We need to change this because despite all these problems, they may be used. But when you read it, it sounded like you were saying, despite the fact that there's lots of problems, we may keep doing it. It's all right for departments to keep doing it, and that was just a comment.
Until we come up, with which is going to be soon. I mean, yeah.
But my more substantive remark is, I was a little concerned when you mentioned that tenure files are going in now and about to be discussed. I would have some, even though one hopes a lot of departments, and I know mine does, offer the opportunity to put in a teaching portfolio with all your reflections and any other information you have.
Right.
I would be concerned about applying a new standard about evaluations to people who are coming up now. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's kind of like changing the degree requirements. If you come in with a new one, you can keep the ones or use the new ones, but I really think people need to get evaluated by the rules that they thought they were playing by when they were coming up.
So if I can respond to that, I agree with you, and I see your point, and that was the reason for including the language that they may still be collected. Past numerical ratings may still be used. But I think your point is somebody's written their teaching statement based on their numerical evaluations, and now they're told these are junk. That does seem like a fairness issue. Excuse me? So I think that's a really good point. Colin, and then Chris Whalen.
So just to get clear on the question that you're asking us, Bill, is in asking for possibly a vote on this, is the difference between if we vote to approve this, then this language will be included in tenure and promotion files going forward in December and January, versus if we do not vote to include this, those TMP files will go forward with the numerical evaluations in them without this writer or any other such writer.
That's correct, and because of these issues with the legal review of this, I think that what I'm saying is that if we vote for this, it would be for a process that would allow the committee to negotiate a better, more suitable language versus the alternative of taking this up in January, with a implementation later.
But either way, files moving forward now and over winter break will include numerical teaching data as part of the files, correct?
They certainly will. So I think Chris Whalen was next.
This is just for a point of clarification, really, Bill. If the evidence is out there and these studies are conclusive on the incidence of bias, especially around gender, then I don't really understand why it's legally more of a hazardous position for us to just state that. If that data, if there could be a legal case brought against us for using these reviews without such a statement, if that evidence is clear and conclusive. So could you say a little more about how the General Counsel passed that one?
I don't want to put words in their mouth, and I'm not a lawyer. So I will say that there, at one point they make the point that if it's really that as bad as you're saying, we should not be using this, period. But that really does raise the countervailing fairness question of, wait, you've just submitted your, tenure file, and now all of a sudden you're told, whoops, throw that teaching section out. And so I don't think that's workable to do that. Melanie has a question in the back.
Because I don't think anybody from GC is here. But so I think one of the issues with General Counsel's office right now is they haven't had the time to engage, I think, an understanding. When it says statements like research shows that these are discriminatory, they need to understand what that means in order to be able to better advise on what this language is and if it should or should not be used and how it should be, considered in P&T cases. And I don't think that level of engagement has happened yet with the General Counsel's office. So when we got to read from them yesterday, it was a very kind of quick reaction to this exact language. They need more time to engage. I think I'm not that my opinion really matters, but I'm going to give it anyway. With Chris's suggestion of if you give this back to the committee and then direct them to engage with GC, I think then they can probably bring you back language that everybody has agreed upon for how to move forward.
Okay, so thanks for that. In defense, I do want to say that this is the second time that GC's looked at this general question of gender discrimination in the evaluation. So I don't think this is novel to them. But I think that I'm taking that as support for Chris's proposal to negotiate the language here, which and then one alternative though could be that the conclusion is no, given that these files have already been prepared, it's unfair to go forward. So the motion would be to have the committee either come up with language that addresses the issues that we've just discussed, or concludes that this can't, be done in a fair way this year. So, yes, Mary, I'm sorry, I'm getting bad at calling on people. So if you feel ignored, raise your hand.
Another alternative might be that if we adopt something like this, that people who have files would be notified this is true and given an opportunity to amend their file with teaching reflection or some additional information.
So that would be another option that the committee could consider with the General Counsel's office. Okay. I think Margaret is next. And then Jing Schmidt, and then Monique, and then John.
So I just want to try to understand. So if we understand that these ratings are biased and they are not related to teaching effectiveness, they don't measure it, then why is it allowable to use it? To say, okay, well, you can still use it.
Well, as we just heard, USC, concluded the same thing, and yet concluded that they were an effective measure of student satisfaction, which is, not nothing. And so that's, the way in which they have continued to use that. I need to cut the debate a little bit short because we have 2 more presentations.
Then could you clarify then in there that they should be used not for teaching effectiveness, but for teaching satisfaction?
I think that is an excellent suggestion and one that I would want to adopt. John? Chris?
All right, so yeah, in order to do a motion.
All in favor of suspending the rules for the purpose of this debate? Opposed? The rules are suspended. Chris?
So my motion would be to send this back to the committee with the instructions to work with the GC's office and other stakeholders in order to come up with some disclaimer language that can be used for tenure files this year.
Okay. Would you be willing to add to a qualification that may not be possible?
And if it's not possible,
this year, if possible.
This year, if possible.
Yeah, this would be inserted into the files, the disclaimer language.
So this language would go to the FPC, to the deans would see it, the FPC would see it, the provost would see it. It wouldn't. The departments, most of the departments have already made their decision, so they would not see this because they've already made their decision. And external reviews are done. That's correct.
Okay, I think Monique. Oh. Okay, so
that's the problem. The motion's on, and I wanted to address, for that, because we were talking about possible options. And one option, we used something similar in our college when we had a change, is the people whose files are going now, they would have the option of choosing between including this thing or not. So being judged according to this and not considering all the evaluations as we have, or not. So they have a choice, and they can... if there's an option, I think it's a good one, and that would speak to the motion, whether we put it there.
So if somebody seconds the motion, then we could take an amendment.
I second.
Okay, and can you state your amendment? Okay, we don't have the exact language, but I think as long as your intent is clear, we're going to...
That this text would be presented and as an option for... the people whose files are going up now, as an option that they can then choose or not to be judged as they go forward.
And would your intent be that this would be, that the committee would be charged with doing that, or that would be one of the options that the committee could come up with?
The committee would be still doing what you want to do, which is coming up with language. But since we have the pressure of time because of the files, the individual faculty members would be able to choose whether they want their files to be judged according to this or not. But
So-
the committee would be doing what you want to do. Getting together, general counsel, coming up with language that is agreeable and that we might use in the near future.
Okay, so if I can just comment on that, I think that. Is there a second? Okay, so my comment on that is that I think that I can see the logic in this, but that would take some of the time pressure off, right? If we were going to do that we could do the exact disclaimer language in January. But I do have to say that this is seeming very, very rushed to me, and this is a very consequential decision for people. And so, it has to be balanced with what we know now about the teaching evaluations. But I personally, if I was going up for tenure now, I would not be happy with this at all. I would want to go forward with the system under which I'd been teaching, under which I'd been, given my annual reviews, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm, I'm
maybe
becoming less sympathetic to the for those reasons.
Yeah.
So I would prefer to see us go forward with something more along the lines of what Chris suggested, and to do as best we could to consider that impact.
Fine. Yeah.
Yes.
I think many women and many minorities would like to see that, though. Just saying.
So,
Amendment.
Elizabeth, did you?
Can I offer an amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't amend it. That's right. I think we have to vote on the amendment before we can amend the amendment. I really just don't think it's gonna. We're running out of time already, and so this is going to be a little touchy-feely, which I'm not happy about. But so, would someone like to call the question on Monique's amendment? Question called. All in favor of calling the question?
We need to have the amendment. We need to have the language so people are clear on what it is they're voting on.
So the essence of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Monique, is that this would be an amendment to have the committee also draft language that would allow those who've already submitted tenure and promotion files to revise them in light of this new information. No? So it's to include the statement or not. Oh, I see. Thank you very much. Okay. The faculty member would have the choice as to whether to have the disclaimer included or not. Okay, so this is still, procedurally going to be difficult for the provost's office, and we should keep that in mind. But I can see the logic of it. Yeah.
Files are already under review. Faculty personnel committees have already reviewed. They're writing letters. The college deans are
Yes.
preparing materials. People are already in process, and this is discussion, not amendment. But if this goes back to the committee, and the committee takes some additional time with the general counsel's office to really dive into the language to make sure that the evidence base is clear and the language reflects the evidence base. You think about the time frame for this, and files are moving through the process. And I'm not sure when the university FPC is meeting, but I think it's just not feasible to in a thoughtful way, include this language in files this year, even though I really like the idea of introducing in a voluntary way this. I like the direction this is going. I just don't think it's feasible to add the piece about and include this year if possible, because the train's left the station.
Mm-hmm. So let me. Okay. So before we close debate, I want to suggest that the alternative for this is for us to talk with the faculty personnel committee for the teaching evaluations. Talk with the personnel committee. Make sure that they understand the literature on this, and that's that. And then we go forward with these changes for next year. So that, I think, is what will happen if Chris's motion fails. But first we need to vote on Monique's amendment. You can't really withdraw it, but if you want people to vote against it, you can say that. Okay. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay. I believe she say louder what you said, Monique. Okay. So all in favor of the amendment? All opposed? Okay. I think we're going to have to do that again. So we're going to have to count. All in favor of the amendment? Keep it up, or do we have a vote, Bettina? All opposed to the amendment? Okay, so it's defeated. So now back to the original motion. Any discussion on the motion, keeping in mind, as I said, that the alternative is for the committee members to talk with the FPC. Ed, sorry.
I really like the idea of having the committee talk with FPC. I think that sounds like a good solution.
Okay. Any other discussion? I don't think that needs to be an amendment. We will just do that. Yes. Correct. Okay. Colin.
Just before we bring it up to a vote, I want to just speak in favor of the amendment. I don't see how
the amendment or the motion.
Sorry, I want to speak in favor of the motion. I don't see how it's not feasible to include this language in files going forward to dean level and university level personnel review committees. Yes, this language may not have been available to external reviewers and department level reviewers, but that doesn't mean that we should perpetuate a condition in which people are acting under ignorance. We are not ignorant of these problems. We were just well briefed on them. And again, I want to point out that whether or not the Senate passes this motion, files will be going forward with numerical data that has been shown through meta-analyses, peer-reviewed meta-analytical research, to be biased against women and possibly biased against racial minorities. So the Senate not acting and moving forward as is, to me, doesn't make sense. And I also want to point out that the language is not, for me, strong enough. It's pretty minimal language. It just says that the teaching evaluations should not be used as a standalone measure of teaching quality. Mm-hmm. So the FPC could presumably meet that standard by just evaluating teaching quality with the addition of one other factor, parameter, or instrument in terms of how they're rating faculty teaching effectiveness.
So, for example, if they got a file that only for the teaching statement just said, "Here are my numbers," they could go back and ask for additional information, right? And in any case, I believe that the contracts already call for peer review at those steps, so there is other information available.
So if the file contains anything else, they'll already be able to meet the standard quite easily.
Okay, so any other discussion on the motion then, which is to... would you want to restate the motion just for clarity? Chris?
So I move that we deputize the committee, the task force, whatever it is, to take this language, work with the GC and any other comments that they get from stakeholders in order to revise the language and insert it into files going forward this year.
Okay, so that's the motion. Any additional discussion? Okay, seeing none, I call the question. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Okay, motion passes, and thank you very much. We're now on to new business, and of course the committee will report back to the Senate on all this. And so Hans and Libby, if you could come up for your long-delayed... Bettina, can you bring up the PowerPoint?
everybody. My name is Libby Batlin. This is Hans Bernard behind me, and we are from the university's Office of Government and Community Relations. Many of you may not know that you all at the university have lobbyists who represent you in Salem, and you do. You're looking at them now, and we're excited for the opportunity today to give you a preview of what the University of Oregon's legislative agenda is for the upcoming legislative session in Oregon, which begins January 22nd and will run through at the very latest June 30th. So for the sake of time today and the fact that the governor's recommended budget for the next biennium was released at 10 a.m. this morning, I'm going to blow through the first few slides and just jump right into what our agenda for the 2019 session looks like. And I'll say at the outset, if you have follow-up questions, if we run out of time or want more context or a deeper dive into any of these issues, please know that Hans and I, or folks, if you have questions in the federal portfolio or the work we do in community relations with cities and counties, we are here to be a resource and helpful at any time, so you should feel free to reach out to us. So I'm going to kick it to Hans to talk about the first piece of our agenda.
So in conjunction with the other 6 public universities, we are requesting a $120 million increase in the Public University Support Fund. For those of you who are not familiar, public university funding in Oregon goes through one pot of money and appropriated, and then it funds through a formula which does not benefit the University of Oregon. That formula is something that we take a lot of umbrage with, but that is not a fight that we have in the halls of the legislature. That is determined by the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. So we work each year or each budget cycle with the other universities to determine what is the level of funding necessary to keep tuition at or below 5%. The increase this time around is $120 million. That is what we will be asking for as a baseline, and that would allow us to, at the U of O, keep tuition at or below 5% for both years of the biennium, avoiding a situation where we would have to go to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission to approve an increase that exceeds 5%. In addition to that general operating pot of money, we are also working to secure an roughly 8.5% increase in funding for state programs. So many of you might be aware that there are a lot of state programs that operate here on campus, whether it's the Engineering Technology Sustaining Funds, LERC, the Tallwood Design Institute, the Clinical Legal Education Clinic within the law school. All of those receive individual appropriations by the legislature, and so we're seeking across-the-board increase for them to continue their operations. On the other side of the equation, in addition to operating support for the university, we also always advocate on behalf of scholarship support for students. This is important for multiple different reasons, but one of the biggest being that our Pathway Oregon program here at the U of O is a last dollar in program. So the more state financial aid we receive, the longer and further we can make those Pathway dollars stretch. So we're working with the governor's office and the Students Association to determine what increase we will be asking for the opportunity grant. It's likely that we're going to advocate for roughly a doubling of those funds, which would dramatically expand the number of students here on campus that would receive them. We also receive a line of funding for what's called Sports Equity Lottery Scholarships. That's a technical, historical term about an old source of funding. The backstory being that at one time Oregon allowed live sports betting. We did away with that so that the NCAA would bring tournaments here. And when that occurred, the legislature said, when you're giving up this revenue stream, we will commit to provide you a percentage of lottery dollars. That funding stream has been the only state source of funding for scholarships for graduate students and a significant source of funding for Title IX sports athletes. So, and a little bit broader perspective at the smaller and technical and regional universities, Southern, Eastern, OIT, and Western, this is the way that they subsidize their athletic programs. So Libby will talk a little bit about capital construction asks.
So in addition to our operating funding and student aid, every cycle the university has a request to the legislature to support a capital construction project. These are state-backed bonds, and the state pays the debt service. This year, or next year in 2019, our top priority will be a renovation of Eustis Hall. We're asking for $54 million in bonds to make that possible. As lots of you know, this is the hub of our biological sciences on campus. We have 3,000 student and faculty members who are in and out of that building, teaching, learning, and researching every year. It's also the place that in the summer our K-12 pipeline programs like SAIL and SPICE take place. And so it is a critical project for this campus, and it also aligns really well with the state's priorities around how do we invest in existing spaces on Oregon's campuses, because even though we are an independent entity now with the governance structure change, our buildings are still owned by the state of Oregon. They are assets of the state, and so we advocate each cycle for them to continue to invest in those. In addition to Eustis Hall, on the capital side of things, the 7 universities collectively advocate for a pool of funds that go toward deferred maintenance, critical life and safety issues on our campuses. This is called the Capital Improvement and Renewal Fund. It is distributed through a formula that goes through the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, so that doesn't exist in statute. Generally, in the past, the last biennium, I believe the U of O got about a quarter of this fund, and it was funded at $45 million. In the previous biennium, that formula, that allocation can shift a little bit. It's at the discretion of the HEC, but we generally do pretty well on that. So our collective request for the 19 session is $65 million in that fund, and that's the type of thing where, you know, it's replacing HVAC systems and plumbing and things that's hard to get philanthropy to necessarily pay for, but good investments for the state and necessary for campus infrastructure. The next 2 slides are the components of the U of O's legislative agenda that really match the academic and research capacity and prowess of the institution with statewide needs and goals. I think it's where we get to really make the case for how the U of O creates public value across the state in all 36 counties. So the first is we are advocating for, and we'll have a bill for a matching fund for the Sustainable City Year program, which is in the Institute of Policy Research and Engagement. We're asking for $300,000 over the biennium, and this will help expand the program to smaller, more rural cities and counties or local governments that want to participate and have a need, but don't necessarily have the resources to put skin in the game themselves. We are asking for the state to fund $500,000 to help us replace the ship at the Oregon Institute of Marine Biology in Charleston, Oregon. It's an important asset for the university. It's our sort of presence on the coast, and the Coastal Caucus, which is the members of the legislature who represent the coastal region, have put this on their agenda and are invested in it. Then we have a $12 million investment to fully build out our earthquake early warning system, which, if you know Doug Toomey and Leland O'Driscoll over in Earth Sciences, they have done really incredible work on Shake Alert and Alert Wildfire, which is this incredible multi-hazard seismic network that we're working with other West Coast states on. And the governor's budget that was released today as a preview put this $12 million in her budget to fully build this out by 2023. We know a big one is coming in the state, and it is really important as from a public safety and resiliency standpoint. So we were happy to see that in there, and that's on our agenda. And then lastly, on this section of our agenda, we are asking for a $350,000 investment over the biennium in the university's prison education programs, which includes Inside Out, and we've gotten support from legislators who sit on the reentry task force, and they are excited about it.
So a couple quick final thoughts. we also have a couple of issues that are sort of tangentially related to the university but impact us significantly here at the U of O. The first is revenue restructuring and cost containment. The president has been very clear and has shared in Salem that the state does not have enough resources to meet our needs, particularly when it relates to educational investment, and that we have cost pressures on the university that are unacceptable when you look at the impacts that they have on tuition. So to the extent that the legislature is having conversations about those cost drivers or those revenue proposals, particularly if there are direct connections between the two of them and funding for the university, we will engage in those conversations. Last but not least is support for the 2021 World Track and Field Championships. Oregon 21 is the official local organizing committee for that event. They have a request in, an overall request for the state to provide roughly $40 million of support for the event. They secured half of that in a lodging tax increase a couple of years ago and are working with the governor on her budget to continue that investment toward the event as we get closer. We will partner with them on that effort. Just a few final thoughts. Obviously, folks know that the governor was reelected. This will be her last 4-year term. We have supermajorities in both the House and the Senate this time around. In addition to tracking all of the bills and policy proposals that we talked about, we also track between 600 to 900 bills that are related to other things. Think of it as anything a large employer would have to care about. You can't spray pesticides near a daycare center. We have daycare centers here on campus, so we have to know just this much about a wide variety of things. That is a non-exhaustive list of what those are, and they get added to every cycle.
And I don't know if Francis is here, but credit transfer is a big issue that the legislature likes to weigh in on, and there was a bill last session that I'm sure you all have heard about, and Francis served on the work group that the HEC put together and did an outstanding job, so I want to give a shout out to her even though she's not here. So how do you all engage in the work? How do we engage you? Like I said at the outset, we want to be a resource and we want to be helpful. There are a couple ways to do this, and we're open if you have thoughts or suggestions on how to make that better. We are ready and willing to do that. We have an advocates program where you can sign up and you'll get updates. You can attend the lobby day, which is May 8th of 2019. We're working closely with ASUO on that. We're also going to be bringing in 2019 a government relations e-newsletter where we'll proactively send you updates. We have updates that go on our website all the time, but sometimes it's hard to know when those go up and what to look for. So we'll be introducing that, and if you'd like to be a part of that, please reach out to us. And then just quickly, we will touch the governor's recommended budget, which came out this morning. Can I just do the quick cut lines on what was in that? So she essentially put forward a tale of two budgets, essentially, where you have a base budget that it has is projected only on the current revenue forecast and economic outlook, and one that assumes a revenue package and increased money to spend. What that looks like from a policy or tax measure standpoint, we don't know, and I don't think we should take any time today talking about or ruminating on. But what it did in these two budgets, in the base budget, the PUSF, our operating funds, was flat funded, which the way that they're distributed is essentially a cut for the University of Oregon in the first year. The capital construction, she did essentially say, I am reserving $225 million in the budget for university capital. She didn't list any specific projects, but that bodes well for us because that is a little bit under, but about the same amount that's been allocated to universities in the past. The opportunity grant in the base budget was flat funded. Sports lottery was defunded entirely. State programs were cut by 68%, which is a little misleading. So if you see that, don't be too scared if you know folks in LERC or the dispute resolution programs, because the engineering and technology sustaining funds, which were a huge portion of that, was entirely eliminated. So that's where that big decrease comes from. And there are folks in our science, Hutch will be very upset about that. And then on the investment budget side, things are much happier there. So if you want to live in that reality, it's brighter. The universities get at least $120 million increase, which was what we asked for to keep tuition at or below 5% for resident undergraduate students. Capital construction, there's no real difference between the budgets. The opportunity grant is doubled. Sports lottery is fully funded at the statutory 1%. And state programs are increased by about $60 million. So, and of course, the engineering and technology sustaining funds are not only restored but increased. So we will send around and do a more in-depth recap once we've had a chance to digest the budget more, but that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Hans and Libby. And I would be happy to allow questions. However, we would need a motion to extend the time by, say, 10 minutes, maybe even just 5 minutes. Do I hear such a motion? Motion to extend this time. Second? All in favor of extending the time by 7 minutes? All opposed? Sorry, I slipped that in. Okay, we have time for a few questions.
Questions?
You guys are giving us a good reminder of Robert's Rules of Order before the session starts. We appreciate that.
I have a question, but I just want to say oh, I'm sorry. I'm losing my 30 seconds. Just two points. One is, I think all of you should know that Libby and Hans are a tremendous resource. They are really the senior. They're not the senior in terms of the people who have been there the longest, in terms of the university folks who are advising us on state and local. But whenever the presidents get together, they are the people who are central to the university's lobbying. They are the people who give advice. They're the people that are doing, the lion's share of the work. And we are very lucky that, they are the people who are very influential in Salem. And they're really doing a great job, and I'm really proud of them. So that's number one. And I don't say that about everybody, but really terrific. And secondly, they went really quickly through something at the end, which is going to affect us a lot. And I just hope everybody understood it. And I'm not going to go through it in detail because I spent the morning with the governor talking about this and expressing my concerns. But we're essentially have a budget situation where they're putting two alternative budgets. One where we get zero increase, which is actually a cut because we're going to get a $7.6 million PERS increase next year. PEB's going up. Salaries are going up. Everything's going up, and it's a cut. Okay, zero means a cut because the way they calculate things. And then a different one, which is giving us what we asked for. And essentially, part of this is set up this way to create pressure on the legislature to pass a revenue bill. And we will be called on at some point to help in that effort. And so we need to, the president's issued a statement today saying that we support revenue increase. At the same time, we also support cost containment, and so that's moving forward. But we're going to be in a very uncertain period of time as we start thinking about tuition increases for next year, because we got one situation where it's a huge cut. I mean, in terms of what we're going to need. Another situation where we're going to be in a fairly good position and be able to keep things below 5%. So that will work itself out, unfortunately, over a significantly long period of time. And so we'll have to deal with that internally.
Thanks, Mike. Any time for one more question? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Melanie is now going to give us a 30-minute talk about dual career support.
Okay, so we're going to take about 2 minutes to do this. So you should have what we call an executive summary that got distributed, which walks through a lot of details. The gist of what's happening is that we all know that hiring partners is one of the things that makes it challenging to recruit, especially tenure track faculty, and also we experience this in numerous other places, such as what we call senior OAs, which is defined as an OA at the level of 11 or above. So what we are trying to do is figure out how to make the best use of all of the limited resources that we have. We also know that in the past, the Provost Office has had a program where we would provide kind of bridge or fellowship short-term funding. What that would mean is it would result in kind of a cliff effect of what would happen in the future, and we would have retention issues with the faculty that we had hired if then their partners' funding ran out and they hadn't been able to find a permanent position. So we're trying to explore different solutions to this problem. What we've decided to do this year is pilot what we're calling the dual career liaison, which is Rhonda, and I'll give her an opportunity just to introduce herself. You can find out a lot more information about this by reading that handout and by looking at the Provost website. Can you go to the tab that's up? It's like the third one, right there. So we have some information on the website. The primary landing page that you get to is actually targeted towards the partners. And then if you click on requesting dual career support page, that is what's primarily targeted towards our internal folks. So there's the outward facing and then the inward facing pages. And I'll let Rhonda just talk very briefly about kind of what she does. So.
Hi, thank you so much for the invitation to come tonight. As a way of introduction, I was the Career Services Director in the Department of Planning, Public Policy, and Management for 10 years. It was a very rewarding position, and prior to that, I worked in human resources at the City of Eugene. So I'm thrilled to bring my background to working with the population of dual career partners. And I see my role as it's taking shape to focus on three main areas. That's to be a primary contact to schools and colleges who request dual career support. Second, to be the primary contact to both prospective dual career partners and then current partners. So I could chat with a prospective partner while a negotiation is going on in the hiring of a tenure track faculty member or a senior OA, or, as I most recently have done this week, is worked with a partner whose husband was hired as a tenure track faculty in the fall. And the thing that I'm really emphasizing with my work with the partners is that it's very individualized. I'll be offering, or I am offering, consultations in a range of areas, from on-campus positions to off-campus to career transitions. Maybe a partner is relaunching their career. So my advice would be very customized to each partner. And then the third area that I am focusing on is to build on the connections that I already have in the community so that I can have key contacts for the partners to connect with. My overarching goal is to be very responsive to you in the schools and in colleges, and also to provide very centered and individualized support to the partners. Thanks.
Okay, next order of business, Mike Urbancic standing in for Francis White on the curriculum report.
I had blithely assumed that we would have Francis with us always. Clearly, my inductive reasoning led me astray. This should be brief. So the motion is coming from the OSCC. It's coming from committee, so it doesn't need a second. However, we do need to make one quick amendment. There are 3 revisions we need to make to an accounting course and 2 finance courses that are existing courses. We just needed to tweak the prereqs, and somewhere wires got crossed, and we just need to establish the correct prerequisites, which were approved in committee. It just it didn't end up in the report as it was supposed to and as had been voted in committee. And then finally, if you scroll down, Bettina, there's one addition, and that's something that got voted on after our final meeting, the German Scandinavian section there. We've voted to approve German 300. It had been offered as a 399, a food studies course that we're approving for German 300, which is an unusual course number. It's one that allows the department to offer one time only, just the once, and it's going to be winter 2019, to offer this course and carry with it some group satisfying label. So in this case, arts and letters, category 1. So I move to amend the curriculum report to incorporate these edits for accounting 340. Finance 311, Finance 316, and German 300. Any seconds? Oh, that's not my place. Sorry.
Standing in for Francis, not me, buddy. Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, I call the question. All in favor of the amendment? All opposed to the amendment? Amendment passes. On to the original report. Any discussion on the report? Comes from committee. Does not need a second. Okay, seeing none, I call the question. All in favor of the report? All opposed to the report? Report passes. Moving on to new business. Do we have any notices of motion?
Yeah, what do I need to say? Just name the motion?
Yes.
So the current conflict of interest potential policy revisions, new policy, conflict of interest, conflict of commitment and outside activities policy, motion.
You're moving that the Senate adopt a revised or a new policy. That you're noticing that this will come to. You're giving notice of a motion. This motion will be for revision, maybe a new version of this policy. We will have a discussion on January 16th.
Thank you.
And a vote on January 30th. That would be the normal order. Or unless... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm completely wrong.
Yeah.
We have already discussed this.
Yes.
It's minor changes are coming back to us. We will vote on it on January 16th. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other notices of motion? Okay, Chris Phillips is absent, but another Chris from math has moved to adjourn. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.